So once again, we're getting a story of a so-called botched execution, and it's reigniting the debate in this country over the death penalty. Here's a picture of convicted murderer Joseph Wood. And according to the reports, although there are varying reports from inside, from the witnesses, they say that it took 2 hours approximately for him to die during his lethal injection in Arizona. Witnesses say that he was sedated at first, but then began gasping for air. His lawyer tried to hustle and stop the whole thing in the middle of the process, but he was unable to get a stay before the convicted murderer passed away. Now, in 1989, let's go back to his crime and tell you what this man is guilty of. Wood shot and killed 2 people. First, he shot and killed his former girlfriend's father while she watched in the auto parts store that the family owned. He then took her life, shooting her twice, once in the abdomen and once in the chest. Now, all of this came after he was accused of stalking her and abusing her, and he had been issued an order to stay away from her. Now, the family of those who were killed says they feel no mercy for his final moments.
I don't believe he was gasping for air. I don't believe he was suffering. Sounded to me as though he was snoring. You don't know what excruciating is. What's excruciating is seeing your dad lying there in a pool of blood, seeing your sister lying there in a pool of blood. That's excruciating. This man deserved it. And I shouldn't really call him a man. He deserved everything he had coming to him.
The pain in the voices of the members of that family who felt nothing for the way that he died. I'm joined now by Lars Larson, a syndicated radio host with Compass Media Networks, and Doug Schoen, a Fox News contributor. Gentlemen, welcome. We had a thanks for being here. We had a similar situation in Oklahoma back in April where it took a longer period, a matter of minutes, I think about 26 minutes, for that convicted of homicide convict to die in that situation. Lars, you know, it obviously reignites the whole question about the death penalty in this country. What do you make of it?
Well, what I make of it is that the mainstream media is going to try and say this is a reason to stop the death penalty. The problem is the vast majority of Americans, more than 70%, support the death penalty. I think the real justice here is that it took 2 hours for this man to die. It took 25 years to get to executing Joe Woods for killing Debbie Dietz. And that's the real crime here, not the fact that this guy snored on his way to hell. He deserves to be there, and he's dead now. How is that a botched execution? And Stephanie Grisham, who's the spokeswoman for the Attorney General's office in Arizona, says that's all he was doing was snoring. Big deal.
Doug, what do you think?
Well, I see it a different way, Martha. I think in a society like ours, we have to look very, very closely at policies that produce results where people are writhing for 2 hours, where we don't have clear and objective ways of administering the death penalty. I'm not against it, but with the number of executions that have been shown through the Innocence Project to have been wrong, to have real issues with law enforcement and real issues with administering the penalty, I think it deserves a re-examination, and a serious one, in light of this situation. I don't make light of the murder. I don't minimize it, but I do think we need to look at the whole question of the death penalty again.
Lars?
Martha, the fact is, in the modern era of the death penalty, since the Supreme Court decisions in the 60s, there hasn't been one single wrongful execution, and Doug Schoen should know that. It's simply untrue. Now, there have been people who've been sentenced to death, and then on appeal, they have been relieved of that sentence of death. But we haven't had a single provable wrongful execution in America.
I guess, you know, one of the questions that it raises, I think lethal injection was created to be a more humane way of putting people to death. And you know, it turns out that in some cases it may not be performing that function. And I think that raises a question about other methods, about perhaps firing squad and execution. I mean, Doug, do you think that may be more humane ultimately?
I think it certainly is a clear alternative we can consider. And I think that, frankly, in our kind of society with our values, as we go around the world, we have to have better administration of our penalties, fairer and more just administrations, to be the beacon for the world. We go around the world saying what is happening in Iraq, Afghanistan, Ukraine is unacceptable. And bottom line, unless we as a people are able to hold our heads high and come together as a society, we can't be as strong advocates for our unique values as we want and should be.
What do you think, Lars? Would it be more humane, because there's consideration of this, to scrap this method that some people find inhumane, even given the heinous crime with which this man was convicted? And there was no doubt about that from anything that that was covered in this case. Do you think a firing squad is a more humane way of executing?
Martha, I have no objection to hanging or firing squad, but you can still make lethal injection work, because if it weren't for the intercession of some of these anti-death penalty groups, we'd still have the same cocktail of drugs that, by the way, are used by your veterinarian when you have to take your dog or cat in to have a dog or cat put down. Those are some of the same drugs that are used on these death row inmates. The fact that sometimes the end result is a man snoring for 2 hours before he finally expires should not be an Eighth Amendment objection saying that that was cruel or unusual. Right. According to the Attorney General's office in Arizona, there was nothing cruel or unusual about what happened last night.
Governor Brewer wants an investigation into what happened, and as you point out, the most important thing to remember is the family that lost Debbie Dietz and Gene Dietz that day in their auto supply store where they were gunned down by this man, and we remember them today. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Martha.